Hey, what's up everyone? Did you know that the people who sponsor me on my crowdfunding platform Patreon of certain tiers are able to send me a list of questions that I will answer live in a special video? Well, that's what I'm doing today. And today I'm answering the questions of Thomas Bedenek. Thomas, I sincerely hope I pronounced your name right. But you've sent me 10 questions that I am going to answer. Well, actually you sent me less than 10, although you were able to send me 10. But I'm going to answer all of your questions to the best of my ability in my little series here, BartVlogging, which I will also use from now on to answer questions. So let's start with question number 1. You listen. Question number 1 is going to be a difficult one. If you were an entomologist, what would be your main goal? Well, if I were an entomologist, would anything change about me? I think my goals would be exactly the same as they are right now. Because being an entomologist by title doesn't mean that what you are able to do changes a lot. And this may sound surprising, but actually the work field of entomology is very limited. Now, what does it even mean to be an entomologist? That's a difficult thing to philosophize about. Is an entomologist someone who likes insects? Most people will say no. Is an entomologist someone who gets paid to work with insects? Some people would say yes, some people would say no. If your definition of an entomologist is someone that gets paid money to work with insects, then by this definition I am already an entomologist. However, I have no education. I basically fucked up 2 times at school when I was studying biology. So now I'm 25 and trying for the 3rd time. Better late than never, right? But I have no education. So some people will say an entomologist is someone who finished college and has an academic degree relating to biology or insects that is paid to work or research insects. Now, by this definition, I am not an entomologist, okay? But entomologist is not really a very definable term because, you know, even an amateur who likes to take pictures of butterflies can be an entomologist. Because I think what it really means to be an entomologist is someone who has produced forward new knowledge about insects in any way or form. And I think someone who gets paid to work with insects, by some degree you are also an entomologist. If you are researching insects, you are an entomologist. But it's a very subjective term actually. It's not like if you are a doctor, you can only be a doctor if you have a medical degree. That's very clear. But you don't have to, there's many types of people who work in entomology. Anyways, let's not ramble too much. But my point is, my mission really wouldn't change. Let's talk about the thing I care about. I specialize in one family called the emperor moths, the Saturniidae. These are my biggest passion. And here's a fun fact. I do not have a degree. I did not finish college, but I have published my own scientific research. Well, although it was very low-key, it was basically just the life cycles of moths that were not documented before to science. So it's not, science doesn't have to be quantum physics or chemistry or something complicated. The only definition of science is when you produce new knowledge. And recording the life cycle of an insect. It's not really very complicated. I mean, but it is science. So, by this definition, I am also an entomologist. Although I'm an amateur entomologist because I do everything myself, and not because I'm paid for it. Basically, entomologists are being paid for the work that I do for free, that I pay for. But I don't think anything would change, even if I were an academic, even if I were a professional entomologist working for a university. However, whatever position I had, nothing would change in my opinion. I'm very obsessed with the family of Saturnidae and just researching the overall faunistics of moths. You see, the reason that I like to breed them is because these life cycles from egg to caterpillar to adult are very unrecorded. If you go to the tropics, go to a country like Brazil, you will find that the life cycles of from 80 to 90% of the species there are not documented to science, and that's pretty sad because, you know, conservation-wise, if you want to conserve a species like a threatened species or even an ecosystem, then you need to have an understanding of how the species that live in there survive and what they need. And recording the life cycle of a moth is pretty easy work, but nobody is doing it. And it's pretty fundamental knowledge that you need for further research. For example, there's a lot of silk moths out there, of which we have no clue what the hell they eat. For example, in Africa you have these long-tailed, these eudaimonia. I know that caterpillars have been spotted on acacia before, but we don't really have a clue about how they live and what other plants they use. And there's 3 species of them, and of 2 of them the life cycle is completely unrecorded, and of 1 of them we found the host plant. You have things like Antistadmoptera from Africa. It's like it looks like a moon moth, but it's brown with long tails. But it's like the African. It almost looked like the African version of the Copiopteryx, but you know, and it bothers me that there's such a lack of information about this. So, if I was an entomologist, my main goal would be exactly the same as what I do now. I would be recording the life cycles of many insects in captivity. And maybe if I had an academic degree, I would be a little bit smarter. I would know how to do things like DNA profiling, organic chemistry, pheromones. All these things are still beyond my simple mind, which would help me write more professional articles than I already do. But in essence, not much would change. And there's also a problem because being an entomologist, a professional one, it also has a lot of restrictions. You see, there's not a lot of money in most insects, so most entomologists end up working where the big money is, you know, because if you are an entomologist, you have to be employed by someone for your expertise, and otherwise nobody will pay you money for your work, okay? And well, the money is, for example, at pest control, okay? Insects do a lot of damage to crops, and farmers are willing to hire entomologists, for example, that are good at pest control. You know, you can make money by developing new pesticides or maybe alternative solutions to them, biocontrol, biological control, like attacking caterpillars with parasitic wasps in a way that you don't have to use poison but use predators against native species. Entomologists get hired to work for example, customs, border control, to you know, intercept invasive species or illegal smuggling or identify protected species, or that's already rare. Some entomologists, they work in vector control. There's a lot of money in controlling insects. For example, malaria is a big problem. Millions of people still die from malaria. So if you know a lot about mosquitoes, maybe you'll get hired to work on how to effectively destroy or control them. For example, the genetically modified mosquitoes they recently developed that are infertile and pair with females that lay infertile eggs. or hatch into larvae that cannot develop to adulthood. So that's typically the things that an entomologist would do, but I think there's very little freedom in the work field of entomology, because, you know, work goes where the money flows, so to say. That rhymes. And what I do, I study insects that are economically worthless. Okay, silk moths are fun, they are pretty to look at, but they have zero value for our society. Nobody gives a shit about moon moths. Yeah, it's the truth. I mean, they look nice, but they have zero value for us. So there's no entomologist, almost no entomologist working with them, because there's no money. Nobody's going to pay you to play with pretty moths. No, they are going to pay you to eradicate harmful insects. They are going to pay you to develop chemicals to destroy pests, but they're not going to pay money to study, well, basically worthless insects. I know this is a bit of an exaggeration. There are a few lucky people who get involved in research. For example, there are research programs at universities, and sometimes they do study things like this, because it's very rare. And I believe that I, as a hobbyist, have more academic freedom than actual academics, because there's a lot of research protocols you have to follow, especially if you want to take livestock or live animals. Yeah, for example, some of you, my viewers, will know that the Nagoya protocol is basically the law you have to follow when exchanging genetic or biological material. It's a lot of paperwork and headache, and me, as a hobbyist, I don't have that bullshit. So actually, if I were to become an independent creator, actually my goal is maybe to become independent, and as a source of income have to rely on my website and YouTube and my books, etc. That means I would have 100% freedom and no boss to tell me what to do, and then I would devote 100% of my time to studying silk moths. And some of you may raise an eyebrow, because well, I think all biodiversity is important and should be preserved. Every species has somewhat of a role to play in the ecosystem, and it's pretty saddening that nobody is investigating all the life cycles of all the thousands of species that are out there that are unrecorded, that nobody understands. And for me, my specialization is just butterflies and moths, but there's other insects out there that are basically economically worthless, and nobody is researching them at all. So there's a big lack of knowledge, because nobody is willing to do the simple work, the basics, which are very important. Even amateurs, like there's a thing called citizen science. Like, for example, nowadays you have websites where amateurs, they can post their observations online in a database, and this is so extremely helpful, and you don't have to be an academic to do this. I wouldn't define the people who are doing this as entomologists, but they are contributing a lot of entomological info. So you don't have to be an entomologist to discover something. You don't have to be an entomologist to research something and produce new info. It helps, yeah, it helps if you are paid to do it. It helps if you are trained to do it, but you don't have to be an entomologist to, you know, even the definition of what is an entomologist is very hard to define. I mean, I think there's people out there who don't know a lot about butterflies and moths at all, but live in remote areas of the world and even by accident just discover new species. Are they entomologists? Maybe by some definition, yes. So it's all about the info you produce. It's a very subjective term. What is an entomologist? I don't know. What is an entomologist? What do you think an entomologist is? Comment it here below. So yeah, I've gotten paid before to work with insects, so that's a check. I have produced scientific knowledge of insects before, so that's a check. So, but I don't have any education, so that's not a check. So I don't mark all the check marks that you would need for most people to consider you an entomologist, but I'm basically a weird guy that's out there. But yeah, wow, it's 15 minutes in and this is the first question, but yeah, this red one really got me thinking. So it's going to rain soon. It sucks. So it's a tough question. But my mission is to produce as much information as possible about butterflies and moths, especially moths that still have an important function in ecosystems, and sadly other life cycles are unrecorded. And this is very important if you want to conserve them. So yeah, it helps them in the long term. Even breeding them like I do, it helps if you make a proper documentation and publish the things you find. Just breeding them for fun, it's not going to make an impact. You have to do something with it, like I do. And then it's going to make a good contribution to science. So yeah, that's what I want to do. And I also want to work on conservation and protecting these species, but that's still far away. But who knows? Maybe I will do it via an alternative way, and that's via YouTube, you know? But okay, next question. So your second question is, what human activity is the most harmful to insect populations across the world? And you want me to name 3 factors. Now this is an interesting question because the wrong things get blamed all the time. Some people will say pesticides. Pesticides are not good for insect populations, but they're really not the biggest threat. Neither is what are some of the things that humans do? Well, there's actually mainly one main factor why insects are being wiped out. That is deforestation. Deforestation or habitat destruction, because it's not always about loss of forest, it's about the loss of livable habitats. Let me tell you about something about insects. It doesn't matter how many you kill. Sounds pretty weird coming from a guy who's obsessed about them, but it's true. It doesn't matter. If I go in the forest and I kill 100 butterflies and I stomp everything to death, doesn't matter. Makes no impact on the population. You want to know why? Because insects have huge mortality rates. You know, some caterpillars, only 2% make it to adults in nature, because the rest die from viruses, from predation, they starve, there's no food, competition. And that's why they lay hundreds of eggs. Because they're used to being killed all the time. People like to blame, for example, collectors. Oh no, you were collecting rare butterflies. Oh, you were threatening No. In fact, if you collect insects, nobody gives a shit. At least insects don't. Maybe animal lovers, they will complain about it. But collecting or killing insects really makes zero impact. Okay? And that's because of their population ecology. Individuals are worthless. Even the most rare butterfly in Europe, for example, Papilio hospiton, there's about 10,000 adults of them. At least in one counting. So that means in reality there are probably more than anyone could kill, even if they wanted to. So yeah, pesticides are the bigger problem because they target the whole layer of the ecosystem overall. They just basically kill every insect over a very large surface area. That goes farther than being an individual who's trying. But you know, even while pesticides have had very bad effects, they're usually only used in agricultural areas or around civilization, and don't directly threaten insects that still survive deep in their habitat. Okay, it's not good news for populations, it affects them negatively, but it's not one of the biggest threats. No. Deforestation. You see, I just told you that it doesn't matter how many insects you kill, in theory, because the population will eventually recover, because they have such huge reproduction rates, etc. But there's one way you can permanently wipe them out, and that's to destroy their home. Every insect has a very niche habitat where they survive. Be it a forest, be it heathlands, be it a rocky slope somewhere on a mountain. But all of them need their own special place to survive. And if we destroy that, then we are destroying their home. And well, there's no way for them to really recover, is it? And that's why deforestation is the single biggest threat to biodiversity all across the world, not just insects, by the way. Deforestation is basically when instead of killing the insect, you destroy the place where it survives. So that's it, that's the end. Some of the causes of deforestation are, well, it's mainly agriculture. If I would blame someone, the biggest enemy of biodiversity are farmers. For example, in Borneo, 80% of Borneo is deforested for palm oil production. It's basically farmers, agriculturalists who want to grow profitable palm oil plantages. That's one example. But there's other problematic crops as well. Forests are being deforested on a very large scale to grow things like palm oil, but also smaller crops like banana or rice fields. Food production for humans, and usually this is agriculture, but the meat industry is also guilty. For example, the biggest reason the Amazon rainforest is being deforested, for example in Brazil, is because of cattle. Brazil produces a lot of meat, a lot of beef in particular, and now for farmlands, forests are being burned down because you can't farm cattle in the Amazon rainforest, so you gotta burn it down to grow your food. So the biggest threat to insects across the world is 100% habitat destruction, and it's and so next to deforestation, I would say it's development or habitat loss. I will write down habitat loss. Now, essentially, habitat loss and deforestation are the same thing, okay? But deforestation just talks about taking away forest ecosystems, but habitat loss is also more subtle. It's when humans develop an area to build new buildings. Sometimes you have a developer and he's like, well, we want to have a luxury hotel here in this place. I was in Cambodia, and I was in one of the few last remaining protected natural reserves there. I forgot the name of it. Oh yeah, it's Phnom Kulen. It's like a mountain there. It's very green, still a lot of trees, but also badly deforested. I think Cambodia has also been deforested for like 70%. There's not much left except for the national parks that are protected. But even in there, development is happening. I saw a new road that was cleared through the forest, so through pristine forest, and these were the Chinese developers were planning to build a golf course there and a 5-star hotel and a new airport. But that's how it goes in developing countries. Protection doesn't mean shit. Money is what talks. So of course, if some millionaire wants to build a 5-star hotel in a protected forest, of course you're gonna say yes, because it's a developing country. Most people there are poor. Most people there cannot even survive enough food to eat more than 1 time per day. Yeah, it's true. I've spoken to some of the staff at their butterfly farm, and they told me they can only afford to eat 1 meal per day. So that's the reality. So if it's your choice between protected forest and survival, most people are gonna sell out. And you know, if I was starving and in a developing country, maybe I would do the same. So, but it's very sad. You see, if you kill individual insects, the population still has a chance to recover, okay? If you kill a lot of individuals, the other individuals will replenish them. But if you remove the place where they live, there's no alternative. You have permanently destroyed the place where these insects survive. And when it comes to butterflies and moths, for example, they are often reliant on very specific food plants. You would know this if you watch my channel, have basic interest in butterflies and moths, and you would know this. That most species only lay their eggs on specific plants, and if somehow these plants are removed from the ecosystem, then they have 0 chance of survival. So this can be done directly by deforesting or habitat loss, but it can also be very subtle. For example, if the ecosystem is changed or an invasive plant is somehow interfering and outcompeting the native food plant, then that's another way they can disappear. But that's very uncommon. Most of the time it's habitat loss and deforestation. It's the single biggest threat to insects on Earth. Is we keep destroying so suitable land where they survive and replacing it with cities, urban areas, but mostly agriculture. If I would point a finger at one type of people who are the biggest threat to animals and nature, it's farmers. It's always farmers. They're the ones who use pesticides. They're the ones who burn down forests for their cattle and farmlands. They're the ones who are against protection and conservation. Even in the Netherlands, farmers are the ones who are shooting the threatened birds of prey, who are illegally using pesticides and Roundup to destroy everything. So don't blame collectors, don't blame cities, don't blame big corporations, blame farmers. Yeah, that's true. Farmers are the ones who are mainly destroying the world. But yeah, deforestation and habitat loss, those are two things. The two main things that I would say are the biggest threat to insects. And I'm just one guy on YouTube, but I really hope my channel will take off someday, because I promise I will use everything I got, all my funds, for positive impact. In fact, my idea for a future video is to make a crowdfunded bee hotel, and the more people who donate, the more bee hotels I will put down, which will help the bees here in the area recover. And it's fun to do something positive with social media instead. Now, you wanted me to name 3 things, but I have to think of a third thing. Now, naming the third thing here is actually hard, because I mentioned deforestation and habitat loss as the biggest threat to insects. And if you take these two, then basically you've already described like 90% of the problem. If we would just leave insects in their habitat like they are surviving now, then there wouldn't be a big problem. They would at least be in there reproducing without interference. But they're being threatened because we keep going and expanding, and we keep birthing more people, consuming more. Gotta deforest more people, gotta feed more people, gotta make more money. So slowly humanity is taking over all these places where insects live undisturbed. If we would just let them there, for most part they would be fine. So this is the biggest thing right here. And that's why naming the third thing is hard. Not because I cannot think of any, but it's hard to say which is the most important. Well, you can name things like pesticides. The climate is changing. This is also threatening some species. Some species are endangered because the conditions in which they survived for millions of years are shifting. And even an increase in temperature by 1 or 2 degrees can have a huge impact on the way how these insects overwinter, etc., the temperatures they need. So it could be climate change, it could be pollution, it could be pesticides. But it's hard to say which one is the most important. These are a no-brainer. This is the most important. But the third thing, it's hard to prioritize because there's all these small things, these small factors, and they all add up. But if I had to name one thing, I'm still going to say pesticide. I mean, yeah, it's basically the problem with pesticide is some are persistent, some will remain in the ecosystem for decades. So if you really spray one area to control a pest, then you have ruined that area for like 10 or 20 years. This really depends on the type of pesticide you use. I think nowadays they've also developed friendly ways to kill insects. For example, the oak processionary caterpillar is often controlled by a bacteria called Bacillus thuringiensis, the BT bacteria. And when insect larvae eat this bacteria, it perforates their gut and they die. And this is actually an eco-friendly way to combat insects, because this bacteria, it only attacks larvae. So of course you're still going to kill all the caterpillars in the area, even the harmful and the non-harmful ones. you're going to destroy all the oak processionary caterpillars, but you're also going to destroy all the harmless butterflies and moths. But still, this is eco-friendly, because it only kills caterpillars and larvae. So the other insects are fine. You know, butterflies and moths are not the only insects that exist on the planet. So yeah, the beetles, the flies, the mosquitoes, the grasshoppers, they are not affected by the Bt bacteria. It's specific. And this is more eco-friendly than throwing a pesticide that eradicates everything in a forest. It's still pretty bad, but it's less problematic than things like DDT. In the Netherlands, like in the 80s, we had a thing called DDT, a chemical that was responsible for basically wiping out everything here. And that's because there's a thing called bioaccumulation. Small creatures and invertebrates pick it up, but it accumulates in the food chain, and eventually things like birds of prey and foxes and whatever, they start dying from it too. And it was banned since then, but even now, like 30 years, 40 years later, now, only now do we see species coming back that we wiped out in the Netherlands then. Even things like hornets were badly affected. Hornets are making a good return in the Netherlands, but also things like birds of prey. Buzzards are very common now in the Netherlands, you see them a lot. This used to be different, they used to be very scarce, because they were absorbing all these pesticides that were ironically used to combat other creatures, but still. Yeah, pesticides of course are a big problem. And pesticides are especially a big problem in developing countries again, because they don't take conservation that seriously. For example, I heard a story in Suriname where they were trying to control mosquitoes. So what they do is they just take a chopper, a helicopter, they load it up with chemicals, and they just fly over the whole city and all the surrounding forest and dump it there, in hopes of killing literally everything. Well, the good news is you're going to kill those harmful mosquitoes. The bad news is you're going to kill absolutely everything else that lives there, probably for the next few decades as well. So yeah, big problem. If you have a garden, try not to spray every spider you see. Even shit like that makes an impact. So that was your second question. Let's move on. Next question that you sent me is, does releasing butterflies or moths into the wild make a negative impact? Well, in my opinion, it's a very silly thing to do. There's a lot of animal lovers out there who want to help butterflies and moths, which is understandable. So what they do is they start breeding them and releasing them in the wild, not realizing that they are doing something potentially harmful. These are typically the people who operate on gut feelings because they want to help their beloved animals, but never took a day in their life to seriously study how they work. Releasing butterflies and moths in the wild makes zero positive impact. Let me tell you why. How good a species is doing is not based on how many individuals there are in the wild. Now, this may sound surprising to you, but that's because you watch the news and hear things like endangered pandas, there's only 10 left. Oh no, there's only 50 Galapagos turtles left. There's only 5 white rhinos left in the wild. And some people would think, oh no, what if there were more rhinos? What if we would really clone 100 rhinos and release them? Well, insects are not like mammals, okay? So if you are breeding and releasing them, chances are you're actually harming them. So yeah, overall it's a bad thing to do, and I will explain to you why. First of all, in insect populations, individuals are pretty replaceable, okay? First of all, the number of insects that survive of a certain species of any given time is not a random number. Let's say there's a forest and there's 20,000 individuals of a certain butterfly in there that survive. What's going to happen if you release 1 million of them? In a short time the population will have returned to what it was before, 20,000. And that's because the number of insects that are surviving at any given time is determined by the environment. You see, the environment does not support unlimited individuals of a species. Food is limited, okay? There are things like predation, viruses, things that attack them, and these regulate their numbers. And releasing 1 million of them is not going to change this. In fact, it's a pretty stupid thing to do. You see, think of it like this. You live in a village, and all the people in your village have lived next to a lake that has fish in it for many generations. Your village has about 100 people in it, but most of them are somewhat struggling to survive because the amount of food that's in the lake is limited. The fish populations have declined. Your little village used to be a huge civilization. There used to be thousands of people, and your village used to be actually a big city. But this has declined because the fish are disappearing for the lake, and you struggle to catch enough to feed yourself and your family. So what you're gonna do? Now imagine that someone visits your village and they're like, ah, these people are not doing well. We must help them. So somebody comes along and releases 1 million people in your village. What do you think is gonna happen? Are you doing better because someone's releasing thousands of people in your village? No. The food supply is still the same. Most of them are gonna starve and die now. And in 1 year you will still have the same amount of people that you started out with. Because the amount of people that were surviving in your village were determined by the food supply and the environment. And releasing many of them or cloning people doesn't solve that problem. And it's the same with insects. It's a futile effort. Let me explain. If you look at the population, a healthy population of any animal, you will see something like this. There will be years where there are many individuals, and there will be years where there are little individuals. Please ignore the idiots that are mowing their grass. And it's very important that you understand why there are such fluctuations in populations. Because these fluctuations that happen in populations are also the same reason why you releasing a lot of moths is going to make zero good impact. You see, the more individuals there are of a certain species, the more difficult it will become to survive for these individuals. That's because things like viruses, predators, and competition become worse the more individuals there are. If there are a lot of rabbits in one good year, then there's also going to be a lot of predators who will have a lot of food to eat. And these predators are going to reproduce and do well. Their numbers are going to go up. What about viruses that kill animals? If there are a lot of rabbits in 1 year, then these viruses are easily going to infect a lot of rabbits, because in one area you will have many individuals and they're all close together. They're all infecting each other more effectively. But also things like competition. Food is limited. And if there are a lot of individuals, food will become more limited. And some will become hungry and die and starve. So what's gonna happen if there are a lot of individuals? They're going to die. The population is going to decline. When there are a lot of individuals of one species, then most of them are going to die. This is natural. Because there are things that counteract population density. It's the same for butterflies and moths. If there's a lot of caterpillars in the forest, then parasites are going to have a really good time. They're going to reproduce, there's going to be a lot of parasites. there's going to be a lot of viruses, there's going to be a lot of birds and predators, because they are eating the caterpillars and there's unlimited food. So not only they are doing well, their babies are also doing very well, and there will be more and more predators, there will be more enemies that are growing and thriving from the many individuals that they feed on. So what's gonna happen is population is gonna collapse, it's gonna break down. And you'll have a year with very few individuals. Most of their friends have been wiped out completely, okay? This is normal. But then something's gonna happen. You know, all these parasites, all these predators that are having such a great year, feasting on unlimited food, they made a lot of babies. But they have wiped out their own food source, because all this pressure was unsustainable. Viruses, enemies, predators, parasites, they were growing in large numbers. They were growing so large that the supply of caterpillars was getting limited. And now there's going to be a problem, because the numbers have declined. And now suddenly these predators are going to have no food source. Hey, there's going to be very few caterpillars left, because they've eaten them all. Think of it like this. So what's going to happen to these birds? They starve. It happens. Some years there is very little food for birds, so some of them just die and starve and make very little babies that will survive. How about wasps or parasites that hunt caterpillars? There's not going to be any prey for them, so the same is going to happen to these predators, but later. Their populations are also going to collapse. Viruses, fungi, parasites are going to have a bad time, because they wiped out their own food. Now this is the population of caterpillars, this is on the lowest point ever. Suddenly the few individuals that survive have it really easy, because their predators have a hard time catching enough caterpillars. So because there's very few of them, suddenly there's relatively a lot of food for all these few individuals, because they don't have to compete with many others. And there's very little predators, because, well, there's very little prey. So these predators are not getting enough food, and their populations are declining. So these guys here are gonna have a very good time. These caterpillars are having unlimited food and no enemies. So the population is gonna go up. What's gonna happen? What do you think is gonna happen when there's a lot of insects or rabbits of any individual of one species? If there's very little individuals, there will be very big supply of food and very little predators, because predators rely on their prey to survive, and there's very little prey. So it's gonna go up. What do you think is gonna happen when this reaches a point when there's too many caterpillars again? It's gonna go down. And here I can write for you. And this is, for example, this is the population, yeah, of a bird that only eats these caterpillars. Now, caterpillars population is going up here. So, for example, let's say here the birds are oh wait, this one's not working. Okay, let's say this is rabbits and foxes. At this point there's very little rabbits, but there's many foxes that want to eat the rabbits. So there is no food for the foxes, okay, because there's very little caterpillars. So the number of foxes is going down. But because the number of foxes is going down, the number of rabbits is going up, because they have no enemies. They're not being eaten. So foxes are declining, but rabbits are really doing well, because their enemies are starving and there's very little foxes to hunt them down. Suddenly you have many prey and very little predators, but these few foxes here that are surviving, suddenly they have a lot of rabbits to eat, okay? So their population is going up. Until there's too many foxes again. Foxes start over-consuming their food, and will have a very hard time to survive. That means the rabbits are going to do well again. And what you're going to see is this. Perfectly in balance. Maybe I should do it with red. This is what you see if you were to research a healthy population of any animal. You would see it's fluctuating a lot, but this is normal. Some years you have maybe 1% of the individuals that you would have in other years. And this is fine. It doesn't mean they're going extinct. It's completely normal. So the number of individuals of a species that are at any given moment does not reflect how well they are doing. Nope. And if you were at any point here going to release 1 million of butterflies, imagine that there's very little rabbits, and suddenly you think, oh, there's very little rabbits and I want to save the rabbits. I'm gonna release a fucking 1 million rabbits in the forest. What do you think is gonna happen? You're going to fuck up this whole process here. You're going to throw everything out of balance. Let's say your favorite species of butterfly is in decline, and you want to save them. Now this is the population going down. You think, oh no, something's gotta happen. But on the other side of the curve, for example, well, something that counteracts the butterfly. Let's say the availability of their good food plants is going up. Because the less butterflies there are, the more suitable food plants there will be. And eventually, when the butterflies reach a new low, the researchers will be at their best, and perhaps the population will grow back to its original. Okay? So you're gonna have this natural fluctuation again. Now let's say your favorite butterfly is in decline, very sad. Oh no, the purple emperor is going extinct, and some idiot thinks, hey, let's release 1 million of them. What do you think is gonna happen? First of all, these individuals are gonna outcompete each other, because the food is still limited. That's not gonna change. If you release 1 million animals, it doesn't mean they're gonna survive just because you threw them in a forest. What you did is you threw things off balance. So here, for example, here's the suitable food plant, and suddenly you have 1 million of these damn individuals. Okay. First of all, there's gonna be a hell of a lot of competition. They are gonna outcompete each other, so they're gonna deplete all the natural resources. And what you're gonna do is you're gonna throw this whole thing off balance. That's the thing. You're disturbing a natural process. And the amount of individuals that can survive at any time is completely perfectly regulated by the environment, not by how many butterflies one idiot can release. And it's never going to make a positive impact. If you would release tomorrow 1 million swallowtails in one small forest, and in a few months the amount of individuals that survive will be back to their original numbers, because the original number was the maximum that the environment can support. If the environment could support more of them, the numbers would already grow up, right? I mean, there's no reason why their numbers shouldn't go up. If there was a lot of food to support 1 million of swallowtail butterflies, they lay a lot of eggs. Insects reproduce really fast. You would see them go up. If there's a nice suitable forest for them, their numbers will go up. But they don't, because that number of insects there in this forest is the number that can survive. And if you throw 1 million of them in there, it's gonna disturb everything, it's gonna fuck everything up. And you are never going to make a positive impact. Never. It's never gonna last. It's a thing that stupid people do, that operate on gut feelings. And it can actually be harmful, because some breeders, they import their livestock from other countries, and even if it's the same species, genetically they're completely different. Oops, a day has passed. I had to stop filming yesterday, for it started to become a bit rainy, which was not very welcome on my expensive camera. So we're going to continue one day later, but it won't make a difference for you, the viewer, does it? So I was busy answering the question why releasing butterflies and moths can have a negative impact, and I mentioned the fact that the number of individuals that live in the wild, they don't need to be regulated, and adding bigger numbers does not help a species. In fact, it interferes with their natural populations. It interferes with the balance that regulates the amount of individuals that are able to survive at any given time. Releasing 1 million individuals of one animal does not help them. It only increases the competition they have in the wild. More animals will be fighting for the same food and the same resources. And if nothing is done to improve the habitat, then over time the population will return to what it currently is. Because you releasing 1 million butterflies is not magically going to improve the quality of the environment where they are supposed to live in, right? Very simple. So to sum it up, your effort to help the species that you like by breeding and releasing them is completely useless. It's not making a positive impact. In fact, it can only make a negative impact and throw things off balance. But there's another thing that we like to call genetic pollution. So you may think, okay, this species lives in my area, so it's fine to release them. No. First of all, that it's the same species does not mean that the individuals are the same. We will take for example one famous butterfly, the mourning cloak, Nymphalis antiopa. The mourning cloak can be found in Europe and America. In Europe, these butterflies have one generation a year and overwinter. This is arranged genetically, this is ingrained in their genetics. In America, the butterfly can make continuous broods. That means as long as the environment is suitable, they will keep breeding indefinitely, but when it becomes cold, they will start to overwinter. This is essential for their survival. Should you release a butterfly from America and Europe, even if it's the same species, it can be found on both continents, then the American one may struggle to survive here, actually, because it is not adapted to this environment. The opposite may also happen. In rare cases, it also turns out that species from other continents are better suited to surviving in the conditions here than they do at home. And the example of this are invasive species. For example, in Australia you have things like the cane toad, which was introduced there. Or, well, you know, sometimes when you introduce a species to the other side of the world, it has an advantage over native species. That means it will outcompete native species. For example, in Europe we have a ladybug that came from Asia, the Harmonia axidiris. And this ladybug here, it's better at surviving here in Europe than the native ladybugs are. And it's outcompeting them, driving the native ladybugs to extinction. So you may say, what's the problem if it's the same species? Well, it's not true. If it's the same species, it's extra problematic if there are differences, because it means that the introduced population may interbreed and hybridize with your local individuals. Now this may lead to insects with reduced vitality, and it may alter the way they survive. If you introduce American genes to European butterflies, you may actually alter and change the way that they survive in the wild, because butterflies from different countries can have different food plots, different pairing habits, different tolerances for cold and warm temperatures, and local places. Animals will all have the most optimal adaptations for their local environment. If you take a butterfly from Italy and release it in the Netherlands, there can be problems, even if it's the same species, so to say. So that's a problem. You can make, if you are going to release something in the wild, make sure that at least you collected it locally, okay? Because that's one way you can fuck it up. And we don't want to trust hobbyists with this, really. Animal lovers are often people with good intentions who have not studied biology, and they don't understand this. So they think, oh, if I release the butterfly, I'm going to help them survive. No, that's not how it works. It's actually a potential threat to the environment. Now, the other problem is invasive species. Okay, some people are dumb. They will end up releasing butterflies that are not native to their country, in their country. That's the dumbest thing you can do. Not only are you releasing a species that can potentially outcompete native species, you are also introducing new viruses and pathogens. Not many people know that butterflies and moths have tons of viruses and parasites, from microbial Wolbachia to specialized fungi. For example, the monarch butterfly has this fungi that specifically kills monarch butterflies, and I forgot the scientific name. It's like its scientific name ends with sclerosis. It's called OE. And it's like Ucophila electrosclerosis. I don't know, this scientific name is wrong. I can't recall it from the top of my mind. But this is a fungi that specifically kills monarch butterflies. For example, there were a few islands in Asia where the wild populations of Hippolymus bolina was reduced to 1% of their original population by a parasite, Wolbachia. I believe this is a unicellular parasite, but my knowledge is a bit rusty on this. It's been a while since I read about this, but basically it happens in the wild that butterflies and moths get absolutely decimated and destroyed. The population is destroyed by viruses and pathogens. Now what happens if you introduce one species from one part of the world to another is you're going to introduce new parasites, new viruses, and you're going to risk your own wildlife. And you may think, oh, this is not something that happens, you're being you're being a nitpicker. That's not really true. This has happened many times. In Europe, the native species of amphibians and salamanders are dying from a disease that was introduced by Asian salamanders that came from hobbyists that stupidly released them in the wild. So yes, the thing that you release in the wild can also introduce new viruses it carries with it and kill native species that have no resistance to it. Another example is crayfish. In the Netherlands we have one species of native crayfish, but it's extinct in almost all of our country. There's only one place, one little small pond filled with water where it still survives. And that's because 11 other species of crayfish, all invasive, have been introduced to our country. So we have one native species and we have 11 introduced species. Now these introduced species are not a problem per se, but they also carry a fungus with them. And this fungus affects crayfish, sweetwater crayfish, and it infects and sometimes kills them. But it just so happens that these American crayfish that have been introduced are somewhat resistant, okay, to the fungus, to the pathogen, because they've lived with it for millions of years, okay. Now then, our native species has no resistance to it. It just instantly dies. So when you introduce these American crayfish to European water, They also spread their disease everywhere, completely driving the native species extinct. This is what can happen if you introduce stuff from other countries to your country. This is really honestly 100% a thing that happens that must be prevented at all costs. What is it? What was I gonna say? Well, that's basically two indirect ways that you can destroy the environment. Is by, if you introduce individuals in the wild, you are changing the genetic pool, and you are potentially introducing new parasites. Now, even if you very locally collect your butterflies and moths, and the livestock, the animals you release are collected locally, and so that means that genetically they must be identical to wild animals, right? Wrong. Did you know that the majority of butterflies and moths die in the wild? In fact, some caterpillars have a 2% survival rate. That means out of 100 eggs that are laid, only 2 caterpillars will ever become a butterfly, and the rest, they die. And why do they die? They succumb to viruses, pathogens, predators, everything I mentioned before. Everything that's out there, out to kill these insects. And this is a good thing, because the weakest individuals will die. They will succumb. This is called natural selection, and natural selection is very important. Among caterpillars and butterflies there's a lot of variation. Some have very different metabolisms. Some caterpillars will grow very slow, some caterpillars will grow very fast. Now if there's not a lot of food, and food is scarce, and caterpillars who grow slowly will have an advantage and survive, because they don't need as much food to stay alive. Now if there's a lot of food abundance, then the caterpillars who grow fast will have an advantage, and the caterpillars who grow slowly will die. This is just one of the 1,000 examples you can think of. But butterflies have variable color patterns. Some of them will be more colorful, some of them will be lighter, some of them will have an advantage with their camouflage and others will not. Some species will produce stronger pheromones and others will produce weaker pheromones. Some individuals have a strong immune system that can destroy parasites, and others have a weak immune system that will die because of parasites. In captivity this doesn't happen. There's no natural selection. That means the weak individuals survive. If you are breeding moths in captivity and releasing them, it means you are introducing weak individuals that would have no chance in the wild, because they would be wiped out. They would be killed, they would be eaten, they would starve. But in captivity they are having a good life. And to the human eye this is not really visible, but eventually you will end up with insects that are genetically inferior, so to say. Well, inferior is not a good word. They are different, okay? Genetics is a spectrum. There are no good and bad genes. There are no strong and weak genes. There are just different properties, and some are better adapted to the environment than others. So this is where natural selection comes in. And natural selection chooses the individuals that survive. Oh, you are a brown caterpillar? Sorry. You are resting on a green leaf and you are highly visible, so the bird will eat you. But the green caterpillars survive. So this color form becomes dominant. But in captivity the brown caterpillars will survive because there's no birds that eat them. So they will not have the advantage. What happens if you release this stuff in the wild? They're gonna get eaten and killed like they would in the wild. So you have been doing this breeding effort, which was basically useless. And this is another thing by introducing, again, another reason why releasing captive animals is not a good idea. You are introducing weak and maladapted individuals that would have a lower chance of surviving in the wild. And maybe they will survive and interbreed with wild animals. And what you get then is weak captive animals interbreeding with stronger wild animals, reducing in weaker offspring. And this may have a negative impact on the population, because when you mix, you are mixing weak genes into a strong population. So you are decreasing their ability to survive just because you wanted to be an idiot that likes releasing stuff. Now, this is some strong language. It's not always wrong to release butterflies and moths if you do it out of interest. I mean, if you are a parent and you have children, then it can be a wonderful experience to raise a caterpillar to a butterfly and release it. This is okay. This is not really harmful. It only becomes harmful when it's done on a large scale and all over again. There's a lot of hobbyists out there who have good intentions, but they say the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And this is true when it comes to biology, because it's very counterintuitive to believe that releasing animals actually harms them, because you have all these breeding programs, like they are breeding endangered pandas to increase their population. People are cloning rare rhinos to release them in the wild. But this is insects, not mammals, and insects really have different ecology, and you releasing million individuals not gonna help. In fact, individuals of insects are worthless. Even very rare butterflies, where only a few hundred individuals are left, they still lay hundreds of eggs. So the reason why they are so scarce is because their habitat is probably being destroyed or very limited, or on a very small local spot where not many individuals can survive in the first place. You can change this by improving the habitat. If you improve their home, then more will be allowed to survive. Think of it as a city. A forest is like a city, and you can have big cities with millions of people, and you can have small villages. Now, if you were to take 1 million people and release them in a small village, most of them will not survive for very long. Same happens if you release 1 million butterflies in a place where they are rare. You are fucking up the ecosystem. You are fucking up the natural fluctuations in populations. You are fucking up their genetics. You are potentially introducing new parasites. You are altering their genetic properties. You are not making a positive impact, and hobbyists generally don't have the ability to judge when it's right to introduce an insect or not, and when it has a negative. That really needs professionals. I hate to say it, I'm a hobbyist, I have big passion for nature and biology, but I recognize that hobbyists should not do reintroduction projects on their own, because they really lack the education and understanding and the cooperation with the government that successful reintroduction programs need. So if you have random people releasing stuff where they want, you're gonna have a big problem. We've had this problem for a long time, and it's only getting worse. Invasive species are wiping out a lot of native species. It's still happening today, and it's all because of hobbyists who think like this. Last but not least, there's also another important reason why you shouldn't release them. Because if you are caught releasing a species and the government doesn't like it, they will ban them. It's unfair, but this is a thing that happens. And I don't want the species I like getting banned for other hobbyists to enjoy them. You can ruin the hobby and enjoyment for others. For example, if I'm caught releasing I don't know, swallowtails in the Netherlands, and it turns out that somebody catches me or makes a picture of me doing this and exposes me online, and some people don't like it, or it turns out it has a negative impact on the population, then the government will say, okay, now it's forbidden to breed swallowtail butterflies, because we don't want hobbyists that breed them to have a negative effect. And this has happened. For example, in Europe there's a few snakes that became invasive, and these snakes are now banned. Reptile keepers cannot breed them anymore because a few idiots released them. I don't want this to happen. I want to enjoy my hobby and don't ruin it for others. That's another argument. But no, generally it's a very simplistic idea that breeding butterflies and releasing them in the wild will help them. It will not. You will not make any difference at all. If you want to help butterflies improve their habitat, plant flowers in your garden. Plant some of their food plants. This will really help them. Phew, this is going to be a long vlog, but I'm enjoying it. I'm passionate about the subject. Let's get on to your final question. Your final question to me is, would you yourself work as an entomologist? And if you could choose, what would be your main project? Well, this one is pretty similar to your first question, where I was, and when you asked me that question, I basically started rambling for half an hour about what does it mean to be an entomologist in the first place. It's a pretty broad definition that can apply to scientists, to professionals, to in some cases even hobbyists. I wouldn't label hobbyists as entomologists that quickly, but generally you can define people that have either experience with researching insects or are paid to work with insects, can also be defined as entomologists. By which definition I am an entomologist, although I am not an academic. So if you consider an academic to be an entomologist, then I am not. But I'm starting to ramble about the same thing again. So I'm going to interpret your question a little bit differently, because I think the essence of what you wanted to know is not my opinion on who is an entomologist or who isn't. What you really wanted to ask me is, if I had the freedom to work on anything I would like, what would I like to do? Basically, one of the things that I want to do is record the faunistics of many Lepidoptera. It boggles my mind that the life cycle of some extremely common but important species is undescribed. Go to Africa, go to a forest. You will see moths there that dominate the landscape, that are extremely common. So that means these insects are also very important for the ecosystem. Something that's so common must also have a lot of predation. And they also consume a lot of food. That means they have a major impact on the ecosystem. And it turns out that their life cycle is what? Is unknown? This can be solved pretty easily by observing them in the wild, by breeding them in captivity. And there you go. Then you have information about their life cycle. This is what I like to do. That's why I'm a breeder. I like to observe these life cycles of obscure species. I've had so many caterpillars, of which I'm probably the first person in the world to see them. For example, I went to Laos, took a few eggs of leopard moth species there. Turns out in literature it's almost impossible to find anything about the species that live there in the first place. You will be lucky to find a picture of even the adult moth, let alone the caterpillars. So it's all new information. And it's really easy information. It's really shallow information. I mean, what caterpillar belongs to what moth? It's not rocket science. It's not genetics. It's not organic chemistry. It doesn't solve fundamental questions about how they operate or evolve. But it's pretty damn important, and nobody is doing it. Hey, let me tell you a secret. Those entomologists who work for universities or the government or in academic positions, they get paid a lot. They get paid a lot of money because they're academics. And you think anyone is going to pay a professional with a PhD to breed caterpillars in captivity? Nah, that's the problem. So the professionals can be bothered to do the easy work. But this is the basics, the fundamental thing that's often ignored. And this is what I really like to do. I like to study these species as they live. And this is like this gap here, because you have amateurs and hobbyists below. And these people, they are interested in moths, but often not on a scientific level. There's a lot of people who like to breed moths for fun, who see them as their pets, and there's nothing wrong with this. If you enjoy breeding them, please do it. but they don't do anything with this information. There's hardly any hobbyists down here that do something scientific with what they find. And then on the top you have the actual scientists. But the actual scientists have probably studied for 10 or 20 years to get a position. And then they're not gonna waste their time with, oh, what caterpillar becomes this butterfly? Because a child could do it in theory. So you have these academics and they don't want to do the easy work. And then you have these hobbyists, but they don't want to do the hard work. And I would be if you have here the bottom and the ceiling, and I am here somewhere in the middle. Because I do have experience with scientific research, writing articles in scientific style. I have a website where I publish everything I find, also the life cycles of all the moths that I breed. So, I mean, there's a lot of good breeders who breed very unusual or rare species, and that's cool, that's fun, but it's also useless if you don't do anything with that information. I don't like to think that I'm a good breeder. Of course, I have above average experience. I've bred some very rare and maybe hard to breed species, but then again I also feel and struggle with a lot of species that I shouldn't be struggling with at this point. So I've only been in this hobby for like 5 or 6 years, don't forget that. There's people out here doing it 20, 30 years, okay? I only have 5 years of experience. I don't know how to breed things like comet moth or the robin moth, or for some people it's a piece of cake. They can breed everything, but they're not sitting here on YouTube. But I am, and I'm not because I'm a better breeder than anyone else. I'm quite mediocre actually. But the reason why I get to do it at this level is because I do something with the information. I publish it, I write about it, I make videos, I come forward with the info. And there's not a lot of people doing this. Neither are hobbyists and neither are academics. So there is this void in between what you have as amateur and professional, and I am here in the middle as both amateur and professional, and I like to fill this space myself. That's how I like to see myself, at least. So I really love silk moths, just the family of Saturnidae. My other interests are tiger moths and to a lesser extent leopard moths, but I'm not very into them. And hawk moths, actually, hawk moths, I think they're pretty cool, but they're below on the list for me. But my big passion is silk moths to Saturnidae and some other related families. Well, Brahmin moths, owl moths, Brahmaea, pretty interesting to me. If I had the opportunity to work in anything I like, I would do this full time. I would record their life cycles basically and produce forward all this information about how they live, maybe in the wild. I mean, breeding them in captivity is one thing, but in the wild is much more scientifically relevant than if breeding something in captivity is not really representative of how something lives in the wild. I only do it because I don't have the money to travel a lot. If I had, I would just go out there in the jungle and collect and breed and study everything, but I can't. So instead of bringing me to the jungle, I bring the jungle to me because I have no alternative. Hey, maybe sometime when this channel has 1 million subscribers, I'll be doing it full time. But I don't think that's ever gonna happen, and even if it does, it's not something I'm going to count on. So yeah, I'm doing what I can as a hobbyist and amateur that is somewhat rooted in science. I'm somewhat of a scientist, but I'm also somewhat of an amateur. I'm a little bit of both. I'm not an academic, but I do have academic experience. You know, I'm a weird guy. So yeah, that's what I would like to do, just work unlimited on the faunistics of the insects I love. It's so essential to know what plant something eats, where it lives, where it flies, what time of the year, what temperature. It's just so simple. You only have to go there and record it. You only have to breed it and record it. Yes, again, good reflexes, don't I? But it's so simple, but so essential. If you want to protect a species from extinction, if you want to conserve a rare species, then you have to know the ecology. You have to know how it survives, what it eats. And we don't know this. It's so simple and stupid that we're lacking this info. That's the thing. That's my problem, and that's what I would like to do. Thank you for sending me these questions. Sorry for making it this long. I got passionate at a few points. Hope to see you next vlog. Bye bye. Hey everyone, and thanks for watching BartVlogs, my random YouTube mini-series where I talk about anything I want. I was very reluctant to do this and start vlogging, because you see, I'm an entomologist from the Netherlands that usually films butterflies, moths and other insects. And most of you have subscribed to see my YouTube content about biology and nature. Not to watch me vlog about random things. But I had a revelation. You see, I am a very opinionated man, and YouTube has given me a platform, an audience, to listen to my opinions. Now, this was hard for me to resist. But it's also for the benefit of you, because this was my revelation. In Dutch we have a saying, and it goes, ik moet mijn ei kwijt. Literally translated, it means, I need to lay my egg. I have a pathological need to share my opinions. And I'm the same, because I'm very opinionated. But why is it for the benefit of you? Well, if I get to contain my opinions within one YouTube mini-series, that means that I don't have to vent them in my other YouTube content. That means if you are here to watch butterflies or moths or other things about nature, then that's fine. It means you won't get to see my opinions when you are watching something educational. So to sum it up, most of my content is for you, the viewers, to see. But this mini-series is for me, because I need to vent my opinions. It's also a very good way to answer personal questions that all of you have asked me in the comments. And now I've given you, the viewer, a choice. Do I want to see Bart's opinions or not? Or do I just want to see the butterflies, moths, etc.? So there you go. Thanks for watching BartVlogs. Like, subscribe, and consider joining my crowdfunding platform, Patreon, because for some reason my entire YouTube channel is permanently demonetized and I'm reliant on crowdfunding for 100% to run this channel. Thanks for watching. Until next time in BartVlogs.